We hope you enjoy today's story. When the critical part of my story began, I was 30 years old and married to the love of my life, Nancy, who was 32. We had 2 daughters, aged 5 and 6, and had been married for 8 years. I recall congratulating myself on the sound decisions I had made in life, including the choice of friends in high school and college, as well as the college I attended. I selected a business to pursue, a company to work for, and most importantly, I married Nancy, which proved to be the best decision in my life. I met Nancy in the first semester of my college education at a business course where she was a graduate assistant. She was attractive, sensual, intelligent, and humorous. I am uncertain of her initial impression of me, but my first impression of her was favorable. I ensured that I performed well in all aspects of the course. She was a graduate assistant for the course, and during the laboratory sessions, I made sure to ask only reasonable guiding questions. By the end of the semester, I could tell she was interested. On the first day of the second semester, I asked her out on a date. We had a whirlwind romance, and we got married 2 months after I graduated from college. One thing I quickly learned about Nancy was that Nancy was notably obstinate and resistant to persuasion or logical reasoning when she had set her mind on a course of action. This quality was not a source of concern for me, although she did concede that it was a significant challenge for her in previous relationships. What did present a challenge for me was her evident desire to emerge victorious in all circumstances. However, I was deeply in love with her, and so I learned to navigate these issues successfully after college. I was swiftly offered a position in the marketing department of a Fortune 1500 company. Despite her intelligence, Nani's foray into the business world was not met with success. She was an excellent teacher, but lacked the ability to apply her knowledge in the real world. However, I believe it was her forward personality that was her main shortcoming. Consequently, she returned to academia. At the age of 32, I became a professor at a prestigious university approximately 15 kilometers from our home. My married life was notable not only because my wife and I had gainful employment that we found fulfilling, but also because we had children with whom we enjoyed a positive relationship. We had loving relationships with each other, and my sexual life was more fulfilling than I had ever imagined when I was young, with the exception of periods that occurred approximately every 6 months. For approximately 10 consecutive days, Nancy and I experienced a surge in libido that led us to engage in sexual activity with great frequency. We regularly engaged in sexual intercourse, which included experimentation. Nancy was particularly aroused when pregnant and required sexual intercourse every day up to the day she gave birth to each baby. I was a satisfied and contented individual at the outset of writing this story. I considered the second most advantageous decision I have made in my entire life was hiring Alicia, my secretary, with whom I had worked for 3 years. It could have been a regrettable decision because, frankly, Alicia was not particularly suited for the job when I initially hired her. I am uncertain as to what factors motivated me to hire her, but some were related to her tragic past, her remarkable femininity, her strong desire to succeed, and the fact that she had to support a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. A 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. Despite her young age of 23, Alicia demonstrated remarkable intelligence and potential. Had she not faced the challenges I faced during my childhood, she could have pursued a doctoral degree in any field she desired. While her verbal abilities were not as advanced as those of her peers at the time of her hiring, over the course of 18 months, she consistently demonstrated superior verbal and interpersonal communication skills. Additionally, she exhibited high levels of organization, diligence, and resilience, becoming a highly capable and reliable employee. The individual in question, whom I considered to be the most reliable person I knew, was compelled to take an IQ test under the pretext of a corporate requirement that all employees must take a certain test. She scored 135, a significantly higher score than the average college graduate despite only having completed 10th grade education. My carefree, somewhat naive existence, which had persisted until that point, came to an abrupt end 15 days after my 30th birthday. On that Monday morning, I received a call from the school where my 6-year-old daughter was enrolled. My 6-year-old daughter was enrolled in the 1st grade at the school, which was conveniently located near the university where Nancy was employed. She was able to drop off and pick up the children almost every day, as Mondays and Wednesdays were her busiest days. I was the primary contact person for the children on those days, so they called me instead of her. Had the same thing happened on a Tuesday, Thursday, or Friday, I might never have found out about my daughter's absence. Elizabeth was experiencing minor gastric distress, but I deemed it prudent to seek the advice of a pediatrician. I consulted with Nancy, but she had already switched to voicemail, presumably due to time constraints and the limited availability of her secretary. I took a brief respite during the day and inquired about the location of Nancy's office. I proceeded to the university, which was on my route to the pediatrician's office, with the intention of informing Nancy or her secretary of my daughter's condition. However, upon reaching the building where her office was situated, I was met with a surprising turn of events. Through the side entrance, which was seldom used, I observed Nancy in a passionate embrace with another man. I immediately ceased driving and took a photograph of them in each other's arms. I then proceeded to take a second photograph of them when they broke apart, with noticeable and recognizable expressions of joy. I subsequently drove my daughter to the pediatrician's office. I was so taken aback that, had it been any other doctor's office, it is likely that medical assistance would have been sought for me, rather than Elizabeth. Fortunately, Elizabeth's problem was found to be so insignificant that the doctor permitted her to return to school after lunch. Elizabeth and I then proceeded to a diner, where we shared her favorite sandwich, as I was not in a position to offer her much else. Following a meal, I returned Elizabeth to school. Upon my return to the office, I discovered voicemail messages from Alicia. I promptly entered the office and closed the door. Alicia had left 3 urgent messages, but I did not respond. She then knocked on the door and entered. Her complexion was as pale as that of a ghost. Was there something serious with Elizabeth's health? I replied in the negative, but my response was uttered too quickly. She had only experienced some minor gastric discomfort. After lunch, I accompanied her back to school. Why, then, do you appear as though you are in a state of extreme fatigue? Alicia inquired. You could inform me of the details. I will eventually elicit the information from you. Perhaps she was correct, but I was disinclined to discuss the matter further. It was likely merely the same minor gastric distress I had previously experienced, as Elizabeth had. Alicia was unconvinced, but she departed from my office, and I spent the remainder of the day in seclusion, actually working. In this context, working is a euphemism for engaging in sexual intercourse. That evening I accomplished very little. I feigned gastric distress, similar to Elizabeth's, in front of Nancy after consuming half of my dinner and engaging in play with the children for approximately an hour. I informed Nancy that I was experiencing symptoms of illness and, in the event that my condition was contagious, I requested permission to sleep in the guest bedroom. I retired to the guest bedroom, but I was unable to fall asleep. I was compelled to devise a solution, but I was not in a position to take immediate action. Neither was I in a position to allow the situation to reach a point of no return. I managed to navigate the remainder of the week without directly confronting the issue. My plan involved addressing it on Saturday. The following morning, I utilized my fabricated illness for an additional day, claiming a fictitious business trip that spanned 2 more days, during which I resided in a local hotel and at my in-laws' residence. In principle, this strategy proved effective, though Nancy exhibited a discerning demeanor, particularly when I chose not to retire for the night on Friday, as she had anticipated. I informed her that I needed to work on the computer for approximately an hour. Nancy inquired about the nature of my work. I replied that I would discuss it with her the following morning and then take the children to the zoo. I suggested that we go to the zoo, which would allow you some time to reflect. I also proposed that we discuss the matter immediately, as I was reluctant to do so at that moment. However, you seemed disinclined to engage in conversation, so I decided to retire for the evening. This was the first occasion on which I had spoken to her in such a forthright manner during our entire relationship. As I looked at her one last time, her eyes were wide open. Subsequently, she departed. The following morning, Nancy appeared to be in a poor state of health. In accordance with the arrangements I had made 2 days earlier, I sent the children to play with the teenage girl who often watches over them. I promised to head to the zoo within half an hour as soon as the children left. Nancy began to express her displeasure by stating, "How could you talk to me like that last night?" This was the extent of her verbal response. I then demanded that she refrain from further comment and instead listen to me. This directive was met with a degree of receptivity, as she leaned back in the kitchen chair. I then inquired as to the duration of her extramarital involvement. Affair. I am not certain of the specifics, but I am quite displeased. I continued. Nancy opened her mouth as if she were about to deny it, but I firmly placed my palm on the kitchen table, which made her reconsider her actions. This is what will happen if you want to stay married. If I ever get any indication that if any friends or family members become aware of the affair, I will file for divorce the following day. Furthermore, if you bring your partner or partners into this house, I will take the same action. The word "they" caused her to recoil until I have proof that the affair or affairs are over. You must show me a health certificate from the STD testing lab and tell me how I can regain trust in you. I will sleep in the guest bedroom when I come back with the children. If you have not informed me of your intention to file for divorce, I will endeavor to maintain the status quo of our family life as it was prior to Monday. However, sexual intercourse will not resume until my 3 conditions have been met. I then proceeded to take the car keys and leave the premises. It is challenging to succumb to depression when one has young children in tow, particularly when they are enjoying themselves so much. While at the zoo, I nearly overlooked the circumstances of our situation until Nancy returned home late that same day. She did not come back until an hour later, just as I was finishing cooking spaghetti, meatballs, and salad to the best of my abilities. Nancy was not dressed in her usual Saturday mom attire, but rather in a form-fitting dress and heels, which she had put on after arriving home. Following the completion of the evening meal, a typical family gathering was held. This was followed by participation in a conventional Saturday night family game, the viewing of a children's DVD, and the tending to the children's needs. Once the children were settled for the night, the parents prepared for their own bedtime routines. Once the children were asleep, the father changed into his cycling attire and set off on a 1-hour bike ride. Upon returning home, I proceeded to engage in a 1-hour nighttime bicycle ride. Upon my return, Nancy was engaged in the act of watching a motion picture in the living room. She then proceeded to enter the kitchen, where I was engaged in the act of consuming a liter of iced tea. She then stated, "We need to talk some more." I responded in the negative, indicating that I was not interested in further discussion. I then proceeded to retire to my room, take a shower, and go to bed. I ensured that the guest room door was securely locked. I initially ignored a knock on the door, but when it persisted, I activated the air purifier to mask the background noise. Our Sunday was relatively typical, and I even held my partner's hand as we walked to church. We also accompanied the children to a family event. The barbecue with friends was a relatively typical social event, and if anyone there could discern that Nancy and I were experiencing difficulties, they did not outwardly indicate it. However, I did inquire with several friends and family members in an attempt to ascertain whether they were aware of any details regarding my husband's infidelity. My questions were either too subtle or lacked sufficient specificity, and it appeared that no one had any knowledge about the matter. During the course of the barbecue, my wife approached me on several occasions and initiated a hug. I responded with a smile. On Sunday evening, my wife made another attempt to resume the conversation, but I declined, citing my intention to go for a nighttime bike ride. After showering, I was able to gain a sense of emotional distance from the situation. I retired to the guest room without delay. One might inquire as to why I selected this course of action with Nancy. There were, in fact, 2 primary reasons for this decision. First and foremost, the prospect of being separated from my children on a daily basis was a source of profound sadness for me. Secondly, I recognized that Nancy's obstinacy could potentially lead to a series of confrontations that neither of us would be able to recover from, ultimately leading to the dissolution of the marriage. I believed that, with a firm stance and a commitment to avoiding a complete breakdown, the marriage could potentially be salvaged. However, I was acutely aware that the next 3 weeks would be critical in determining the fate of our marriage. It was assumed by all those in our acquaintance that Nancy and I had reverted to the relationship that existed prior to the incident in question. However, Alicia was aware of the truth and was not deceived for a single day. When I assumed the role of Vice President of Marketing, I initiated a policy of reducing work hours by half on Fridays. This proved to have a beneficial effect on morale, resulting in higher productivity than that achieved during a regular 40-hour work week. On a Friday approximately 3 weeks after the incident, the remaining personnel had vacated the premises, leaving only Alicia. She entered my office at approximately 1:30. "I am not leaving until you come clean, Blake," she said, taking a seat in the chair opposite my desk. Initially, I attempted to provide her with justifications, but she was not receptive to them. "I am aware that you require the completion of a contract with Jenkins before your departure from this location today. This is a highly comfortable chair, and I will not vacate it or permit you to undertake any work on the Jenkins contract until you divulge the truth about." Her crossed arms, legs, and intense, somewhat aggressive stare left no doubt that she intended to do what she said. I therefore informed her of the circumstances surrounding the incident. She then inquired as to how long this situation was going to persist. I replied that I was unsure, and that approximately 3 weeks had elapsed without sexual intercourse. I then informed her that I had been paid a salary that was sufficient, particularly in light of the generous Christmas bonuses I had received. I was able to rent a small house, and now my aunt, the only worthwhile member of my family, is living with me as a live-in nanny. I was somewhat taken aback that she broached such an inappropriate topic. I was not aware of that, but I am gratified that you feel adequately compensated. I have informed you that it has been 5 months without sexual intercourse for me, and that the last encounter was unsatisfactory. She then proceeded to elaborate. Her legs and thighs. I interjected that this was an excessive amount of information. Alicia, in fact, it is not Blake. Your current situation has provided me with the opportunity one have sought for the past 2 years. A chance to alter the dynamics of our relationship. You will not be in town next Tuesday evening or the following week, and you will take me with you. If you do not agree to this, you will have to begin searching for a new secretary from Wednesday. Subsequently, I was informed that I would be contacted in 2 weeks. After this, the woman in question rose from her seat, walked around my desk, and planted on me the most passionate kiss I had ever received in my life. She then turned and headed for the door. Just before stepping out, she informed me that she was aware of the company's policies regarding affairs and sexual harassment. She also stated that she was capable of handling such matters. I was left in a state of astonishment for the better part of an hour. Upon reflection, I came to the realization that one of the reasons I might have hired Alicia was that I sensed in her a hidden sexuality that contributed to her incredible femininity. While Alicia was not as beautiful or sensual as Nancy, I had to admit that she possessed a quality that defied proper analysis. I was compelled to consider the possibility that it might provoke a strong sexual reaction. I needed to think things over carefully by Monday. I had several questions and a few decisions to make based on how those questions would be answered. I called Alicia into my office and closed and locked the door. Were you serious on Friday? I was never more serious in my life. I have 2 young children. I probably won't divorce. What if I would like to reconcile with Nancy and, in return, I will not engage in sexual activity with anyone other than her. I am not asking you to fall in love with me. I am asking you to use me for your sexual gratification until your circumstances change in a way that suits you. How should we navigate the policy on affairs and sexual harassment? I consulted with an employment lawyer who specializes in these matters and was assured that everything would be fine. Should we both sign waivers and commit to confidentiality? We can avoid any potential issues with the company should they attempt to enforce the policy against us. Furthermore, we both possess sufficient knowledge of each other's characters to understand that we can maintain complete discretion and trust each other in matters pertaining to our honest actions towards each other. In the event that the worst should happen with your brilliant recommendation, I will find another solution. I observed Alicia for an extended period without blinking. She returned my gaze, and I gradually approached her, seized her in a passionate kiss, and embraced her as she had kissed me on Friday. During the embrace, I caressed her buttocks with one hand and her breast with the other. When we broke the embrace, I instructed her to obtain a waiver from her lawyer friend and arrange a joint trip for us on Tuesday. 2 rooms were available at the hotel, situated on different floors. Alicia informed me that she would not be occupying her room. She was smiling widely, and she proceeded to leave my office, giving herself a slap on the backside before leaving. There was no indication that anything had changed in our relationship on Tuesday. Alicia and I behaved in a professional manner in the limousine to the airport. After boarding the aircraft to our destination, we subsequently took a taxi from the airport to the hotel. Upon collecting our separate keys at the hotel, Alicia gave a $5 bill to the bellhop and requested that he take her suitcases to her room, to be divided later. She then took my hand and led me to the elevator. As we rode up in the elevator, she gave me a look that could only be described as the most passionate gaze in human history. Her gaze was intense and passionate, arguably one of the most memorable I have ever witnessed. Despite my initial surprise, she proceeded to remove her clothes within 2 minutes of entering my room. Throughout this process, she kissed and touched me intimately, particularly focusing on my breasts, which were surprisingly large for someone who typically wore conservative clothing to work. She then proceeded to remove my pants and boxers without any preliminary foreplay. After a 2-year period of anticipation, she finally initiated physical contact, jumping into my arms with a spontaneous exclamation. I momentarily lost my footing, pressing my back against the wall. Despite the unexpected movement, we managed to reach the bed without incident. As we embraced, she expressed her appreciation for the kiss, describing it as really good. The experience was more intense than I had anticipated, which is a noteworthy observation given the extensive physical contact that occurred. After exploring each other's bodies in detail, I facilitated her orgasm on 2 occasions. We then proceeded to Alicia's room, where I retrieved my suitcase and transported it to the room while she changed for dinner. When we met in the lobby, I was taken aback by the transformation of my secretary, who had previously exhibited a more reserved demeanor. I smiled. "Do you like it?" It could be considered a rather understated observation. I recalled Blake's assertion that there were no outward signs of affection. I agreed with that assessment. We then proceeded to enter the hotel dining room, maintaining a physical distance from one another. Throughout our meal, we made a conscious effort to avoid any gestures or expressions that might be perceived as overtly sexual. After dinner, we engaged in a leisurely stroll through the local park. After spending time in the local park, we engaged in physical contact as soon as it became dark. Upon returning to the hotel, we proceeded to our respective rooms and contacted our families approximately 30 minutes after I concluded my conversation with Nancy and the children. Alicia then knocked on my door, and we proceeded to undress each other in a gentle and gradual manner. We retired to bed but did not engage in sexual intercourse. Instead, we engaged in acts of lovemaking. Alicia fell asleep with her head on my shoulder, and we were both genuinely satisfied. After a brief and somewhat melancholy sexual encounter the following morning, Alicia returned to her room and changed into her typical conservative work attire. We then left our luggage with the concierge. With the concierge, we proceeded to the first of our 2 scheduled meetings. During the remainder of the trip, there was no physical contact between us. Prior to the initial meeting, I informed Alicia that she could speak freely, as there would be no need for her to pass notes or engage in any other forms of indirect communication. You possessed the intelligence and discernment to understand the situation. I advised her that she should not conceal her talents. She appeared gratified when I informed her that both meetings that day were successful. Alicia was both charming and intelligent. Despite her supporting role, she made a number of valuable contributions. Both potential business partners and suppliers expressed admiration for our presentations, including Alicia on the flight back. I conveyed my thoughts from the previous 6 months, which were that Alicia would excel as an assistant marketing director and, ultimately, a market director. In fact, in a couple of years, you could undoubtedly perform the duties of my position as well as I do. "Are you serious?" she inquired. "Of course, I would require a suitable replacement for a secretary before I would recommend you for management training. Are you sure you're not just trying to tell me that this is a good? I would like to suggest that we avoid sexual intercourse in the future. In the last 24 hours, what could have possibly led you to believe that I was not interested in continuing our sexual relationship? The meeting will take place tomorrow afternoon from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. We will be open from 3 to 5 p.m. tomorrow to discuss both management training and our future intimate relationship." Alicia and I had the most unusual meeting I have ever had with anyone in my life. We planned every detail of who she could hire to replace her as my secretary when she starts management training in the company, how we will continue to meet to continue enjoying the phenomenal sex we had during our business trip, and what Alicia needs to do to position herself for success both in the business world and in our personal relationship. Subsequently, a series of rapid events transpired. I procured a pre-owned automobile for Alicia's aunt, enabling her to serve as a teacher's assistant at the educational institution where Alicia's offspring were enrolled, and to facilitate their transportation when required. Alicia had a colleague in another department of our organization who was discontented with her role, but sincerely aspired to assume the position previously held by Alicia. Despite her adherence to a particular viewpoint, she was over the age of 50 and, while she remained firm in her convictions, she was notably reserved. I was not convinced that she would perform the duties of her role with the same proficiency as Alicia, but I was reassured enough to employ her following a 2-month probationary period. During the transition period, Alicia collaborated with my new secretary to ensure a smooth transition. She commenced managerial training even before her official commencement date. Alicia and I conducted separate visits to her residence, 4 or 5 days a week around lunchtime. On some occasions, we engaged in competitive activities, while on others, we engaged in intimate relations. Her managerial training commenced after her classes began. AM and her children and aunt were not home until 8 o'clock. Therefore, we had approximately an hour and a half each weekday to engage in sexual activity. Alicia was a compassionate, energetic, captivating, and, most importantly, passionate lover. Additionally, we managed to go on overnight trips on 2 occasions, only after an exceptionally delightful lovemaking session. I was conscious of the fact that hiring Alicia was the best decision I had ever made, even when she lay her head on my shoulder to fall asleep. Alicia had a positive effect on my mood, despite the fact that Nancy still showed no signs of meeting the 3 requirements I had set out for restoring real sexual marital relations. The situation was becoming increasingly less worrisome. It was a rather vague and enigmatic situation for Nancy. There were indications that Nancy had likely concluded her extramarital affair and was attempting various strategies to entice me back into her bed. However, due to her intrinsic stubbornness and the inclination to prevail in any disagreement, she did not accept what I had conveyed was true. One evening, after following our return from a social gathering where she had consumed more alcohol than usual, Nancy attempted to seduce me when I entered the shower. She accompanied me, and I did not dismiss her, make any disparaging remarks, or take any other form of disciplinary action. She then began to plead with me, stating, "Blake, I really need you." I informed her that I would only consider her request if she completed the 3 tasks that I had previously outlined. The only 2 options, Nancy, are divorce or SAR. You must be getting sex otherwise. Otherwise, you wouldn't refuse me. All I need to do to refuse you, Nancy, is imagine you cheating with your lover. I finished drying myself off, tossed the towel in the laundry basket, and went to the guest room. Meanwhile, my relationship with Alicia was going exceptionally well. There is one particular day that will forever stay in my memory. It was a Friday, and since Alicia was finishing her training for managers that day, the ceremony, which began around noon, gave us a few extra hours at her house. After an extremely energetic session of sex, we engaged in leisure activities. With their respective naked bodies, the 2 engaged in conversation in bed. Alicia was informed that she would be presented with an award at the ceremony. I retrieved 2 gifts from my briefcase. The first was a gray-blue sleeveless dress with a lieutenant's coat, which I hoped she would wear to the ceremony. She expressed admiration for the garment and consented to wear it to the ceremony. The second gift was a sapphire necklace that perfectly complemented the dress. She was overcome with emotion and shed tears. It took some time for her to recuperate from the intense sexual encounter, which she managed to do by the time we parted ways in separate cars for the ceremony. She was radiant and composed at the ceremony as a result of unanimous voting by her classmates. Instructors bestowed an award upon her as the most outstanding student in the management training class. I was gratified to witness this outcome, particularly given that it had been over 6 months since I had issued my ultimatum to Nancy and just about 3 weeks since Alicia had completed her management training. During the preceding 2 months, there had been indications that this might occur. She appeared to be in a melancholy state of mind, and my optimistic disposition seemed to irritate her. One Wednesday evening after dinner, she said, "Blake, this Saturday, we can hire a nanny and go somewhere secluded to discuss the possibility of rekindling our relationship as a married couple. I am committed to meeting the 3 conditions you outlined and will not deviate from them, although I do not particularly enjoy them. I would be grateful for some recommendations. Of course, I will take care of everything." Nevertheless, if Nancy was indeed serious, I was especially obliged to our children to restore our marriage to its normal state. Alicia shed a few tears, and I wiped them away. I knew this day would come, and it would be very difficult for me, but I understood the situation I was getting into, and I cherished the last few months spent with. I am grateful that I was able to enjoy them for the remainder of my life. However, let us not squander the time we have remaining until your situation is entirely resolved. On that Saturday, Nancy and I visited a peculiar location, given the nature of the conversation we were about to have. There were only a few spectators in attendance at a minor league baseball game, so we proceeded to and sat there. In fact, it was probably the most secluded place possible, and the atmosphere around us was more likely to reduce rather than increase stress if things went wrong, as there was a greater chance of nobody finding out. In contrast, if we were in a fancy restaurant, there could have been a scene, as Blake would have been aware of my feelings. After my second pregnancy with Joyce, however, you recall my enthusiasm, she said with a thoughtful smile, and I concurred. At times, I experienced sudden and overwhelming emotions, either overwhelming excitement or intense distress. These episodes often manifested as spontaneous orgasms or the urgent need to relieve myself. One such instance occurred in my office. I was discovered by one of my married colleagues, William. I have very vague memories of the surrounding circumstances of what happened, but the gist of it is that we engaged in extremely passionate, animalistic sexual intercourse. After that, whenever I had these flashes and he was around, we would have intercourse. Nancy looked down at her hands, and quietly she wept for several minutes, then composed herself and continued. It was as if I were not cheating on you. It felt like another world until you shared with me your knowledge of the situation, which I still do not understand how you obtained. I did not consider the adverse consequences at the time. When you rightly demanded that I take action, I did not contest your authority. My personal flaw of always having to win arguments and my stubbornness led me to strengthen my relationship with William instead of immediately ending it. After 2 months of contemplation, I realized that I would lose you if I did not start acting rationally. I sought the help of a psychoanalyst and worked diligently on my issue. I believe I have resolved it with these words. She pulled out a document from the envelope she held in her hands. This is William's sworn written. The document she handed me was a notarized sworn statement drafted by a man named William Montrose. Attached to the notarized sworn statement was a photograph. The photograph showed the same man who had seen Nancy in a tight embrace on that Monday. I inquired about how he had been persuaded to sign the document. I informed him that if he did not do so, I would tell his wife about our affair. He was reluctant to have this happen. I informed him that if there were any adverse legal consequences after he reviewed the sworn statements, I would ensure his financial security. Nancy replied, "I suppose he was your only lover." "Yes," I assured her. "That resolves issue number 1. What about the health certificate from the venereal disease testing laboratory, and how can I regain your trust?" she inquired. Gently, I took the document from her hand. It was a second document from the envelope. The document was a complete set of disease tests, in fact 2 different ones. The first was dated a day after William Montrose signed his sworn statement with results provided a week later. The second was dated 10 days ago with results provided yesterday. In both instances, she received a completely clean bill of health, which resolves problem number 2. I smiled. Problem number 3, however, is trickier. Nancy admitted, "Tell me, is this enough?" She then handed me a 2. The initial document on the first page was a statement that she had signed for her psychiatrist, authorizing him to provide any information that I might request. The second document was a notarized affidavit from the psychiatrist stating that he did not believe that Nancy would deviate from the path again and that, in his opinion, the issues that Nancy faced, which accelerated and prolonged the affair, were no longer a concern. The issue at hand is whether this is sufficient. The subject inquired expectantly, and I have devoted considerable time and attention to this third point over the past 6 months, particularly in recent days when it appeared that Nancy was finally prepared to concede. This represents a commendable initial step. However, given the 6-month interval between our discussion and this latest development, I believe more could have been done. After careful consideration, it has become evident that further measures are necessary. It is therefore required that a postnuptial agreement be signed, stating that in the event of another affair being engaged in during the marriage, sole custody of the daughters will be granted to the husband, although visitation rights will be permitted. Additionally, the house and 60% of the marital assets will be received by the wife. I informed her that, regardless of the postnuptial agreement regarding custody, a family court judge could potentially override it in the best interests of the children. However, it would certainly provide me with a strategic advantage in any proceedings before the family court judge, should they be necessary. Nancy agreed to consult with a lawyer. In the following week, we prepared and signed the necessary documents. After the game ended, we engaged in leisure activities, including mini-golf and dining at a casual restaurant. We then returned home and watched a DVD. Nancy expressed disappointment that, despite undressing in front of me and my refusal to engage in sexual intercourse until all issues were resolved, I subsequently suggested that she would eventually have her way. On Monday, I experienced a greater degree of emotional complexity than I had anticipated. I was genuinely concerned about disclosing to Alicia that we had a limited window of opportunity to spend time together. When she opened the door in the morning, I observed that she was in a state of distress. I inquired about the cause of her distress, and she responded, although the content of her reply was so distorted that I was unable to comprehend its meaning. After approximately 15 minutes of consolation and emotional support, I was finally able to discern the essence of her narrative. It appeared that her obstetrician-gynecologist had erred in indicating the date of her next contraceptive injection. I was not aware of the issue myself until I arrived at the clinic on Saturday. The doctor had already administered the injection and inquired about my sexual activity over the previous 2 months. Despite her somber demeanor, Alicia displayed a hint of amusement. I did not inform her that during that period, I had engaged in highly active sexual intercourse on at least 60 occasions. Alicia proceeded to narrate her experience in a disconcerting manner. She stated that I had merely responded in the affirmative. Her expression was peculiar, and she administered a complex pregnancy test. Upon analyzing the results, she informed me that I was in the 3rd week of pregnancy. This information immediately resonated with me, as it coincided with the conclusion of her leadership training and the moment I had released the most significant amount of semen of my life into her, reaching the deepest penetration I had ever experienced. I swallowed twice. Alicia gazed at me intently. In her eyes, she said, "Blake, if you want me to have an abortion, I'll do it." She paused for a few minutes before speaking. I was sure this wasn't what she had planned. I was also sure that the idea of having a child with Alicia was a bad idea in some sense, but that it was either not that bad or actually good in other respects. I gently kissed her lips. "It's your body and your choice," I told her. "Alicia, however, I would prefer for you to retain custody of the infant. It should remain our secret, and I would not be listed as the child's legal guardian on the birth certificate. Nevertheless, I would provide financial and temporal support for the child's upbringing. I would also find a way to make it work so that Nancy would not discover the arrangement." Alicia collapsed into my arms, sobbing. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," she repeated over and over. I stroked her head when she regained her composure. I informed her of the unfortunate turn of events, not for my benefit, but for hers. Nancy had finally come to her senses. "Tomorrow might be our last day together," I told her. Alicia straightened up, smiled broadly at me despite the tears streaming down her cheeks, and said, "Then I'm taking tomorrow off if my boss, that's you, will let me. I'll love you to pieces." I took the afternoon off, in case Nancy had signed the marriage agreement that evening. I would require some time to recuperate, and she would require some actions. On Tuesday evening, Nancy presented me with the marriage agreement, her expression indicating a certain degree of apprehension. I returned to the master bedroom that night, and the following morning, we engaged in passionate sexual intercourse. I was surprised at how easily Nancy and I returned to our former life, the wonderful life before that faithful Monday. One reason was that she became less stubborn and no longer felt the need to win every argument. Overall, she became more acquiescent. This, combined with my exceptional sexual relationship with Alicia, while Nancy and I were estranged, allowed me to truly forget about her. In fidelity, everything worked out for everyone involved. Alicia gave birth to a healthy boy, my only son. Despite my initial disbelief that she was aware of my role as the child's father, I attended natural childbirth classes with Alicia and was present in the delivery room 3 years later. Nancy secured housing at the university, and Alicia assumed the role of the I was fortunate to have the best marketing assistant and then marketing director in my employ when the company we worked for was sold and I received a substantial financial windfall from my stock options. I was able to retire without any financial concerns at a relatively young age. I recommended Alicia for the position of vice president of marketing, and the transitional team was astute enough to accept my recommendation. As I write this, I am a stay-at-home dad. Alicia, who is a stay-at-home parent, lives with her 3 children 1 block away from me. I care for her children in my home when they are not in school. I am currently pursuing my lifelong ambition of writing a great American novel. All the adults in the household are content, and all the children are well-adjusted. You may inquire as to whether I have engaged in sexual intercourse with Alicia again. You are welcome to do so, but I will not respond. Thank you for your attention and for listening until the end. If you found this presentation interesting, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment.